Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining in this panel discussion as we discuss plans of action towards enacting change. And as we look at the George Floyd situation or the murder of George Floyd, we want to take time to discuss not only identifying the problem that exists out there, but also the solutions and plans of action that we can enact to ultimately make a change in the difference in the world, but also in the Black community. For so long, I think, we've harbored so many emotions and so many feelings, but I think the George Floyd situation was a breaking point for us all. And so with that is I think that we have an opportunity to ultimately unify together as a community, as a culture, as a race, and ultimately take those feelings and ultimately create change. But it's not only about identifying and diagnosing the problem of racism, but it's also about how can we come together and unify and put together a plan and a strategy to ultimately combat racism and systematic oppression. So that's why we're here today, is to ultimately talk about and to discuss how we can create solutions and plans of action for change. And so I first want to thank Reverend Brown for allowing us to host this event here at Mount Zion First Baptist Church, which is an historical, church. And we have Reverend Jemison, Reverend T.J. Jemison, who was highly involved in race relations and the civil rights movement. And so, if you would, Reverend Brown, tell us a little bit about, in honor of Reverend Jemison and Mount Zion, the role that this very church played in race relations so many years ago.
Well, before I moved here, I was an instructor for the University of Kansas, and I taught religious history and I taught African American history. And come to find out, there was a chapter in the book that talked about the Mount Zion First Baptist Church. Now, I've been in the convention, and I knew Dr. Jemison from the convention, but I didn't really know a whole lot about the church. And I wound up teaching about the church in school. So now if you just imagine, I'm an instructor at a university teaching about the Mount Zion First Baptist Church, and then I ultimately become the pastor here. So Dr. Jemison came way before I knew anything about the church as its historic perspective. But then to be able to come and to be able to spend some time with him, just to talk to him the few years I had, to see how he was way ahead of his time. Everything he's done, everything he did, it was ahead of his time. But when you specifically look at his degree, he knew people. He was a people person. He had studied them in a way that he knew how to talk to Black or white. He was, to be honest, he was probably a greater politician than he was anything else. He's most noted being the preacher and president of our convention, but the reality of it, he really was probably a greater politician. And with that being said, I think that's what really allowed him to do what he did, because he understood people. He understood the psychology of people. I remember Jesse Jackson, when he came here, we were talking over lunch one day. This was years ago when I was an undergraduate. He said that you had to understand Negro tics. And I said, well, what's Negro tics? And he said, that's Negroes and politics together. He said, that's a totally different kind of politics. And I'm probably 19 or 20 at that time. So I really didn't understand what he was saying. But when you think about what Dr. Jemison did in the 50s and in the 60s, being from Alabama, coming here, steeped in racial tradition, he knew how to cross over. And I think that's the key to success when you're dealing with racial issues. You gotta be able to not be intimidating to white people to a certain degree. I often say to people, you gotta have Malcolm X and you gotta have Martin Luther King. You can't, you know, either or. And Dr. Jemison knew how to do both of those. So just to see what he's done at this church, but then across this nation, it's unbelievable.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I think he retired from Reverend Brown. He also led one of the first bus boycotts as well. And from that, that was the blueprint for Dr. Martin Luther King, in which the whole Montgomery bus boycott and how all that came about. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Reverend Jemison, Dr. Dupuy Anderson, Dr. Lewis James, and so many other notable African-American leaders at Mount Zion. They were the folks in the community who really helped to get the Baton Rouge bus boycott started, executed, and really shut down. It didn't last very long because people realized how organized it was, taking people to work. The bus company realized how much money they were losing. And so it was a success. And so Martin Luther King and his partners, they all came to Baton Rouge. Of course, the Selma bus boycott, Montgomery bus boycotts got more press and they went longer. But no, he got that blueprint right here at Mount Zion First Baptist Church from Reverend T.J. Jemison. And, you know, it wasn't just that. He did a whole lot of work in the sanitation area. He did a whole lot of work in a lot of employment sectors. One of the biggest things I think he did as he grew Mount Zion was he was smart enough to get in the streets and play with people. He'd play softball and he'd do things that really connected him and endeared him to people. And people just loved him to the very end. So Reverend Jemison was definitely a giant in Baton Rouge and the nation.
Wow. And it's so befitting that here we are today in 2020, discussing race relations and discussing how we can ultimately improve and strengthen our Black community here in the Church of Mount Zion.
Yep.
So as well, just want to thank as well each panelist, I guess, for joining us. We have Anthony Kimball, managing partner of Kimball Properties. We have Representative Larry Selders joining us, Reverend Renee Brown of Mount Zion First Baptist Church. We have Todd Sterling, president of Alpha Media and Public Relations, and Representative Ted James. And so my first question, I guess, which is for the entire panel to get everyone's perspective and feedback, is tell me as a Black man how you were impacted by the George Floyd murder. How were you impacted? Ted?
I'll tell you that for me, the first thing I said was not again, right? We see so many new allies because of, I'm guessing, just the length of time of the video, be it the arrogance of the officer as he stares directly into the camera, be it the white medical professional who was begging them to administer aid. But for me, it was no different than what I saw when I saw Alton Sterling, and no different what I saw when I saw about Trayvon Martin. So for me, it was just not again, right? I see a huge influx of new allies this time, I guess, because of how blatant and arrogant this officer was. He was all, it looked like he was almost proud to do what he was doing.
Yeah.
So for me, it was no different feeling outside of the other hashtags that we've all grown comfortable with. But I'm going to take the opportunity to hopefully seize on the moment because of all these new allies that we have.
For me, I think that it impacted me with a little bit of anger that law enforcement officers that you pay their salary could think so little of you and your children and your wife and your mother, like you don't have family that loves you, like you don't have people and relations. And that was a lynching. And to see it played out on an American street, especially after the Breonna Taylor thing, especially after the other thing and the other thing and the other thing, you got to ask yourself, what is it about police officers that can, arrest a serial killer that goes into a church in South Carolina, take him to get a Burger King Whopper, and yet you got to kill unarmed Black people. So, you got to ask yourself, man, how does it impact you? It makes you really wonder about, what kind of God they worship. It makes you wonder about, what is going through their mind, because, from my seat, it's pure evil to kill someone without any thought, like it's, sport or something. So that's how it affected me.
Anthony?
And, definitely a lot of the same feelings, both of my colleagues had. I think for me, my dad's a cop, so for me, while trouble, sad, it's also for me is almost like a sadness that like this is what my father's part and like what he has to be part of and representing. Because I do know what's in his heart and like how he feels about the work that he does. But I will say, just seeing that, it impacted me to the point that like I didn't want to be on social media. I didn't want to continue to see that because it was like Ted said, it was so arrogant, it was so blatant. And then like the response of it to like read people's comments, especially from other races, and like you're somehow like justifying this by certain things, or this is what happened before, or did he resist? That is like, how can like it's like just almost like mind-boggling that's like that we still too in a lot of this instances that like we still won't talk about really what's going on, and we'll deflect and we'll say this was the reason, or let's talk about this one. It's like, how more blatantly does it have to be? Where definitely some of the feelings that I had within myself.
And for me, now that my kids are older, I have a 7-year-old and about a 5-year-old, and they're seeing these headlines, they're seeing the news. So it's really, impacting my life, my family, and their awareness of being safe around police officers. They're actually beginning to lump police officers in a box. When at one point of our lives, my son was like, I want to be a doctor and I want to be a police officer. Now he's like, I don't like the police. And that's what the media is doing, and he sees that, he's seeing that these cops are killing, and he's really understanding as a second grader that his life has no value. He feels like, and I'm dealing with that, so that's how it directly kind of impacted us in my house.
Brian?
When I first saw it, just kind of took me back. And I don't make a habit of watching that kind of stuff for duration. God has brought me a long way, and I'm not trying to find out how far I've had to go, and I don't like to find out how quickly I can go back. I know I'm saved, there's no doubt that I'm saved, but there are still trigger points that I have that if I see something that remotely reminds me of my own experience, it takes me to a very dark place in my life where I'd be subject to hurt somebody. And I saw that within the first 2 minutes of that clip. And then when I watched it again with my wife, I showed her, I said, I want to show you when he takes his lesson. And I saw when he did that. And I saw what they were doing. And so I immediately began to talk to God about what I needed to do to be able to make sure that I don't allow what used to be in me that has been buried to resurface. Because we have to be very careful. I have learned I have to be very careful that some of the experiences that I have been capable of hiding and burying, I'm smart enough to know they're not gone, they're just buried. And so when I saw that, I knew I needed to have a conversation with God. How to help me help people.
And for me, it brought about a lot of the same kind of sentiments of anger, frustration, and for me, it was my, I guess, breaking point to whereby we're taught certain things to be politically correct about racism, not speaking out about certain things, to keep our mouth, shut or quiet, or we just continue to just, go along with things that ultimately happen that we all know transpire and all occur. But for me, it just made me reflect upon my purpose in life. And so my purpose in life ultimately is to help encourage, equip, and empower others to be all that they have been called and created to be. And so with that, it stirred up something in me to want to do more, to whereby, we as a community, we've got to ultimately strengthen ourselves. And we've got to ultimately combat all of these things that are ultimately that we're facing. We've just kind of taken certain things for too long. And as a race, as a people, as a culture, we do have strength. And there's strength in numbers, there's strength in unity, and there's so many of us as well that are just without hope, that are not ultimately walking and living in their purpose and in their potential, which also it then impacts things in such a way whereby we don't have as many people at the table that we can have and should have, because of the fact that so many people are hopeless and so many people are not walking in their potential. And so we need to ultimately, come together and encourage, empower, equip, and unify and strategize how it is that we can ultimately combat this thing, solve this thing. And so that's what it ultimately stirred up in myself. And so with that, I guess, Reverend Brown, you talked about, violence and anger. And so my question for the panel as well, what are our thoughts on, I guess, violence and protesting, and I guess our response to, the injustices that we continuously face?
Okay. I may be the wrong guy to start with, but I'm 53, and I am a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Martin Luther King was my fraternity brother. And, Dr. King was always a peaceful, nonviolent protester. Peaceful nonviolence was the way that, he and his organizations decided to go about it. But I do believe now that Malcolm X was right, because I think the only thing they understand is violence. I believe that, peace is wonderful if you're dealing with peaceable people. When you're dealing with people who will kill you by kneeling on your neck in the street, or bust in your house and kill you while you're in your bed, or kill you while you're sitting in a car and you don't even have a gun, or you don't even have anything that could be remotely offensive to someone, I think that a lot of those law enforcement officers are scared. And so, it's my question becomes, why are you in our community if you're scared of us? And I think that's a policing issue that has to get to the core of, you really need to look at your people. And if they aren't comfortable with dealing with a group of people, or if they aren't capable, and you think about it, law enforcement officers go through training to de-escalate situations and to get situations under control. And yet more and more we see they're the ones who are starting the issues when it comes to violence. And so I'm at that place in life where I believe you got to protect yourself. I became a concealed carry person a couple of years ago, and I don't like to carry, because I believe when you carry, you're that much closer to something jumping off. But when you see somebody coming at you without good intentions, or coming at you not peaceable, I believe you got to protect yourself. And I think more and more people need to be real about, you need to protect yourself and your family.
Any other thoughts?
I think that we as a people have to stop criticizing the way other people protest, and stop criticizing a protest because you're not the leader of the protest. Wow. And I've seen that a lot here in this city. I didn't organize it, so I'm not going. And don't criticize folks because you have young folks on Segan swag surfing and say, "Oh, that's not the way to do it." Go out there and teach them something, right? Go out there and educate them, because what they know is not what Todd experienced or what Reverend Brown experienced. And we have to recognize, Black folks get so excited about our diversity, but then sometimes we like to, strategically ignore the fact that we are diverse people. And in that, you have to recognize your way of expressing your anger is not different. Now, I'm not going to say go loot and burn up anything. I'm going to say go burn up the power structure at the state capitol, go burn up the power structure at the Metro Council. Don't go burn up businesses and loot businesses, go loot power, right? But we can't just sit back and say that, oh, those young folks are wrong because they're not doing it the way that we did. And we have to do a better job of, like my parents used to always tell me, like you don't clean up for company. So like basically your house got to always be clean and it don't matter who show up. So for us, we got to make sure that our stuff is clean because we so busy worried about what white folks going to join us in this movement. And honestly, at some point we're going to need the allies. But right now we got to get us together before we even expecting other folks to join us. So I think that the first thing with the protesting and the riots, number one, your idea may not be what some young folks understand right now, and don't just sit on the side and criticize them. Get out there and help them and teach them and guide them.
There you go.
That's good. That's good. And I think that I guess you talk about, you know, starting with ourselves in the Black community, what we can ultimately do. That's within our reach, that we can ultimately strengthen ourselves. So I guess my next question for you, Larry, I'll start with you, but this is for the panel as well, is as it relates to, I think that far too often we're fragmented as a race, as a people. We don't come together to unify. We don't understand. I don't think we don't understand, but we have a hard time collaborating. So how do we go about, you know, unifying and building that sense of collaboration as we move forward?
And I'm always going to keep reverting back to the church. I think a lot of things and the influence that the church have in the community is always a good start. Folks in the church, you know, they come from different areas, different walks of life. They all have the same objective when they come to church. So we can start in the churches, in the community, and reach out and branch out and touch those folks and bring them in. It's going to make the world of difference. And I think the churches have one of the biggest influences, if not the most influences, on people's lives, you know, that anyone can have. So that's what I get.
My question would be just in response to that: are young people going to churches? Or I mean, I guess that's my question to you, Pastor. It's like, I mean, to be able to touch people and have an impact on them, you got to be able to touch them. So, I mean, is that an actual institution that still makes sense to be able to touch young people in the Black community? Because I think we have to be willing to ask ourselves those real questions. Because the reality of it, when I look at the Black community, we have a broken ecosystem that has huge disconnections in it. And we can't just say, I think, in my opinion, some of the things that worked 60, 70 years ago are going to work today, because that's not our reality anymore. But I mean, I will, do you see that with young people as the real opportunity, as like the touching point?
The young people, they do go to church. A lot of them go to church. But church for them has been redefined. And that's where a lot of the challenges are. They're not interested in the structure. They could care less about this building. They're more concerned about what do we do when we leave this building. So you do have a large populace that's concerned about the church, and they're willing to support the church, but they're not going to support a building. And if you're not going to do ministry, they're just not going to support you. It's just the way that is. Now, of course, it's not like what it used to be, because church used to be all we had, and it was the only thing that we owned. And so for a whole lot of us, that was our business. That was our economic development system. But with everything that has happened, it has changed. And so when you, if you just kind of take what you asked in terms of where do we start, well, we have to start first with the individual. You know, in Romans 10:9, it says we've got to be saved. We've got to confess with our mouth, believe in our heart, God raised you from the dead, and you should be saved. You got to come to the grips with the fact, okay, I'm saved. Once you come to grips with that, then you got to start acting like a saved person should act, which then says, okay, let me get away from what I would have done prior to this relationship to where I am today as a result of this relationship. So then what winds up happening is what Larry says, if you help a person identify who they are in Christ, you then start alleviating some of the stuff that other folk have told you that you know. So when I went to LSU and my mama told me don't go to LSU, I had a full ride. She said, son, they don't want you down there. Okay. I couldn't believe that coming from Southern. But I went and then I found out that she was telling the truth. But the reality for me was to experience what they did made me have to find something else to prove that I was not what they said I was. Because I didn't get that at Southern. I'm in the band at Southern, I got it going on, and you leave from being popular to basically being, we don't want you. So then now I got to figure out, who am I? And so then you calling me the N-word, and then I'm going to fight you because you call me that. And then I don't understand, I'm messing myself up because I've let you put me in a place that I don't need to be in. So if we can help our young people to understand there's something that happens to you that should happen to you when you enter a relationship with Christ that makes you different than what you were before that relationship. And that's a tough thing for people, young people to grasp.
Definitely agree with that. I would say for me, just going back to that ecosystem in our communities, I think a lot of it goes back, to we don't have mentorship where, we've kind of, in a lot of our communities, because of a lot of the other stresses of our communities, we let the public school system be the educators of our kids when instance, when really a lot of the things you see in other races, a lot of the things they've learned in business, they learn those things at home. So I think for me, a lot comes back to education and economic empowerment within our communities. And I think that, starts simply with Black people got to start wanting to be around each other and live around each other and invest in each other. One thing I always say, and that we don't really talk about as a community, is, what were some of the things, integration was good and something, but what were some of the things that hurt with our communities and then another thing we don't really talk about a lot is we talk about white flight, desegregating white flight, but we don't talk about Black flight. And in a lot of instances, and I even saw it with my parents, a lot of Black people, and you got money, 80s and 90s, and you followed white people to the suburbs. And we took our homes, and a lot of times with our businesses, we took them out these neighborhoods. I was talking to somebody about Leo Butler. You go into Leo Butler's town, they got all these people on the wall, and most of the people in the community don't know them people because when you're successful, you bust out. So I think too, a lot of what you're going to with being able to show these young people and set examples is this type of success they don't see because we don't live in our own communities. So I think another part is we got to have these young people realize the God within them and what they're able to be as creators and the capabilities they have. Because if you don't ever see examples, how do you know what you're capable of? If no one, I always tell my dad, the white kids in Oak Hills where we live didn't need him as a mentor. The kids on Myrtle Street, the kids on Chippewa needs a Black cop as a mentor that's going to have, positive interactions with them. So I think for me, it comes to economic empowerment and education and really being willing to invest and empower each other within our own communities. And I think that's something we've just lost, and that we just some way this time around, it just has to be different.
And I'll piggyback off of that. Going with what Larry mentioned, I too believe that a lot of it starts within the church. I think that the church is or can be the hub for change, and I think that the church also has to continue to ultimately, in my opinion, evolve is to continuously make it about empowerment of the holistic person, the holistic being, and not just necessarily spirituality. But of course, we start there. That is the foundation, and with that, you understand who you are. You understand as Anthony mentioned, the God, within you, and the fact that, you can do all things from which you were created, but also not just stopping there. So when we think about the church as well, I think that there should be empowerment, one, when it comes to as well, unified people development. And so when we say unified people development, okay, when you look at other races and other cultures, they teach each other how to work together. They teach each other how to pool resources together. They teach these types of things. And I think that as well in the church, whereby we have a mass of, Black people congregating together, we have to begin to teach those things. And then from there, as it relates to as well, going back to, economic empowerment, I think that as well in the church as well. I think that we have to continue to do a better job or be more intent as it relates to, economics. What does that ultimately mean? Finances. How does that ultimately, impact my community? When it comes to, I know we don't like to talk politics in church as well, but being really informed on what political law means and understanding these types of things. And I think, and I'm probably going to go, too far left here, but I think that many times in the Black church, what happens is that we have a politician who will come into the Black church and they'll show their face and they say, hey, and this, that, and the other. And everybody says, okay, well, they're for the people because they showed up here and they gave a spill for 5 minutes or whatever it may be. And then they're out and about their business. And then that's how they ultimately get our vote. But how many of us are actually informed on what bills, what laws, and what things that they're ultimately looking to pass to ultimately help our community and be able to make informed decisions? And so for me, I just think that, if we could ultimately continue to strengthen, the church and focus on the holistic being and the holistic person, then I think that that's as well the opportunity to enact, I guess, change within ourselves, whereby A, we understand who we are, B, we understand the importance of working together, and it helps to, educate us as well. So when it comes to, our education, and one thing as well about the Black church that was successful in the past is the whole education in the church. When you had schools that were connected and tied to the churches, and as Anthony mentioned, you have this public school system in which, they want to take, God out of things, and you only want to teach, certain things that are not always specific to us and our race and how we can be more, effective or impactful. And I think that once again, the church is a hub for the opportunity for so much change to be enacted.
You went here, and I'm gonna throw this out here, and I usually get in trouble when I say this, but the politician who comes and shows up every 4 years, who gets our vote versus the people that keep voting him in, who's more at fault? To me, it's the people, because and for me, like, we have such a very low expectation for elected officials. Like, I could do a back to school drive, give out some bikes on Good Friday, and y'all would love me, and not care about how many bills I pay. Correct. And that's not my fault. Right. Like, that's on the people. That's the game. Because we have so few low expectations. And when I first got in office, I used to do all those things. I'm like, man, I'm going down there to pay bills. Like, I could just, everybody up here could go and give out some bikes and some school supplies. But we see them like, oh man, Representative James, he might not be passing no bills, but he gave my baby some loose leaf paper. And that's more on us. We have to expect more from the people that we put in office, because if you're gonna allow folks to just keep doing it, it's like if your boss said, I'm gonna pay you for 40 hours, but you only gotta come 15 this week. Who gonna say, you know what, boss, I'm coming for it? Yeah. No, you're gonna go your 15, and then if you're really ambitious, you're gonna find another boss that's gonna pay you for your other 25 before 40. So we have to make sure that the people that we electing are doing. You ain't elect me to give you no school supplies. Like, you ain't elect me to give you no bikes at Christmas. You elect me to go to the Capitol and pass some bills. And we have to stop. And people say, oh, well, how can I find it? If you want a chicken sandwich, or if you just moved to Baton Rouge, you want to know where to get your nails, then you're gonna go on your phone. You're gonna find the one closest to your house. You're gonna find the one that has the most followers on Instagram. You're gonna find the one that has the better pictures on Yelp. And you can do the same thing with elected official. With 2 clicks, you can find everything Larry and I have voted on the file. But we're not doing that. But we could go to our cell phone and Yelp and Google and Instagram and find anything that we want, but then say, oh well, y'all not telling us, and we got to do a better job of putting it out there.
Right.
But the onus is more so like when we vote, that's the easiest part about this whole thing. That's easy.
Mm-hmm.
Showing up and voting. The hard thing is holding our feet to the fire.
Right.
That's the hard part.
Right.
To Ted's point and to Kimball's point, there's an axiom: train up a child in the ways that it should go. And you're talking about, mostly you're talking about church, but you're also talking about in life, politics. And I think that if you want your child to go to church, you need to go to church. You need to be a part of a church. I think you need to be active in a church. And even if your child doesn't like the church that you go to, you should really, really seek out a church that they like to get that experience that they want. Because now there's so many different denominations and delineations of what church is. You can come in jeans and t-shirts, but I grew up in a church where you had to kind of wear what I have on to go to church. So I think that you got to figure it out, what's best for you and your house when it comes to both the conversation about, are we going to be a God-fearing, worshiping family? In the same way with politics, I think you got to have those conversations about, these are the people that are running, and this is who we're voting for, and this is why we're voting for them. And as they become of age, they've had enough conversation to be engaged in the political process that they should know that the expectation is for them to vote. The expectation is wherever they are, college, high school, wherever they are, appropriate age-wise, they should be trying to make their way to their ballot box to vote for somebody and be a part of the process. I think too many times we give people a pass, and when I'm talking about adults who aren't engaged. You think of talking about parents who aren't engaged in the church, parents who aren't engaged in the political process. We got to get people engaged in our community. Things in America start with politics. The dollars flow based on politics. Goodness, spirituality start in church. If you really want to have a good, wholesome life, you really need to be in a spiritual environment. And a lot of times that starts at church.
And just to add to that, like why voting is important bills, we got to stop stopping there with politics and really explain it, like how this system really works. Like at the end of the day, the bills and stuff are important, but two, we have to hold politics, like we got to get funding for back into our community. And we have to understand that the government is a source of business that literally creates companies, year in and year out, and that that's a big part of like the government. Like we have to look whether city, state, federal. I mean, these are just businesses that are incorporated that are calling themselves government, but at the end of the day, they're still businesses that should generate revenues to our community. If we're going to be paying property taxes, sales taxes like everybody else. So at the end of the day, I'll say, like you can get people engaged, start giving them, start impacting them economically. Until like, I would say this, a lot of times in our community, especially I've seen like with local elections, what I mean? There's no like Black people we have popularity contests a lot. White people, you see, they have people that's been successful in business that want to get into government because they know this is a system that they can continue to work to benefit them and everyone around them. And until we understand how that economic, empowerment through this government vehicle, then the importance of lobbying and to impact the decisions we want to make. I mean, we're missing because like we got to stop fooling our people and talking about just going vote for this person and we're gonna get these policies. No, don't work like that. That's not the game, and that's never been the game. So like, let's stop explaining the game like that because that's not the game. And we got to start being as leaders, like making sure we're educating people on really what the game is, and like so we are playing on a fair playing ground because like we got people upset because they're like, well, I keep voting, I keep doing it, and nothing changed. Because like, well, when we start putting businesses together and we have politicians that's giving us government contracts, and we're the ones hiring lobbies, and then we're the ones putting $millions behind issues. I mean, like, it comes back to economics.
Yeah.
Contract law and economics, and money. You know what I mean? So I think too, we just have to, the ones that understand these things, we just have to start doing a better job of saying, this is the game. This is the game we're playing. This is what you may have thought was the game. This is the game.
So from a strategic standpoint, because as we all can agree, the fact that a lot of us in our community, we simply don't know, we don't understand the game, and we don't understand what it really means to vote and everything that entails. So strategically, what are we going to do, or what can we do to ultimately change that?
But I kind of want to come back to what Ted was talking about earlier about the legislation, and he made a point about how many bills have you passed, right? But I think that for me, being the first termer, my first session ever, it's so much diversity down there at the legislature. But it's so much. It's hard, to be, for me, a new guy, to pass a bill that one of my white counterparts could pass with no problem. So I don't think that reflects a bad or a good politician if you don't have a lot of bills. I think, you might have said the quote, your name doesn't have to be on a bill, but as long as your thumbprint is there, making the things happen. So I don't think that the number of bills you pass make you the best politician. It's kind of what I'm saying. Like, could you check your record, not on you particular, but just in general. And I don't think that doesn't mean you're not effective. Because if I can go in the room and make a deal and put millions of dollars into my community without passing no bills, I think that's more effective. And just kind of say what Anthony said, if you can put more money in the community hands and the folks' economic development drivers, and you have no bills and you've been there for 4 years, I think that's more powerful. That's my personal opinion.
So Anthony, strategically, how do we get people the game?
I think it comes to being intentional. I think that's something we lack within our communities. It's just that being intentional and sometimes thinking things are just going to happen or things are just going to work out. And I think, some of what we're seeing, and I hope where it's leading, is that we have to be more intentional than ever. You know what I mean? My little cousins and stuff in my family, I don't have any kids, but my cousins know that, like, I tell them all the time, I work so hard, so college is only an option for y'all. And I'm intentional about that. And my family members that are close to me, like, that's what it's really going to be. And, like, until we're intentional about, like, hey, me and you, we've talked about working on lending together. I'm intentional about reaching back out to you till we find a deal that works. And I think we have to really start strategizing within our own relationships and being intentional on figuring out how ways to work together, and then allowing that knowledge to as we hire people, as we lead organizations, to trigger that, how people within my company that probably would never know about government contracting, if we get a huge roofing job, now everybody that works for me is going to know about government contracting, because I'm going to tell them, because that's how we all are getting paid. So, and they're going to take an interest in it because that's how we all are getting paid. Right. You know what I mean? So I think, and being intentional and also understanding that, like, it takes strategy, and it takes, everything doesn't work out, the first time or everything goes smooth. I think sometimes even within our community, we're not willing to give each other's chances and say, like, we'll criticize the local black person in the community store instead of, and Walmart, you're going to take that from. So it's like, hey, this first deal might not work out, me and you try to do together, but I'm more intentional because at the end of the day, you're a black lender. I think, that we can add value, and at the end of the day, I want to put money in your pocket because that allows you to go do more deals. It allows me to go do more deals. And I think just being intentional and really planning and thinking through these things. And last thing I'll touch on is that we have to realize that a lot of these institutions, they wasn't built for us. So until we truly start analyzing these institutions and say, hey, that wasn't built for us, so how can we redo things that work, that work for our community? We keep telling all our, young kids, hey, you got to go to college, man. People going to college coming out with debt and can't ever pay for it.
Yeah.
We still tell people go to college.
Yeah.
No, some people need to go to vocational school.
Yeah.
Some people need to come at 18, 19, just come work with me and become an electrician or plumber. You know what I mean? And we can't judge anyone like that. We have to be intentional and say, baby, you going to get, going to get that general studies degree and having $30,000 in debt. That makes no sense. You can get that same $40,000 job right now in Baton Rouge. And like, we got to have honest conversations and be intentional, about what we're instilling instead of saying, hey, well, this was that. Society says everybody should go to college. That ain't working for us. That ain't working for us. We already don't have, we're at the bottom of the totem pole in wealth, and we telling people to go get in more debt that we hadn't even figured out how to properly pay off.
Mhm.
That don't make sense.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll say, and Anthony is a shining example of it. And what I'm excited to see in my generation is more collaboration, right? Like the guy he worked with a few years ago, he was like, I had an issue. He came and fixed my dishwasher. Like Tevin was like, and started off doing that. He was like, hey man, I didn't bring the right part. I'm coming back. Don't worry about, the extra payment. I'm coming to fix it. And now Tevin building neighborhoods and reconstructing everything in Baton Rouge. And because he linked up with that dude and wasn't trying to just sit up here and do it by himself, wasn't concerned about, who was going to get all the credit or the shine. They're collaborating and I called Anthony about a month ago. I was like, hey man, I got some money I want to throw into a project. And he was like, well, how you want to do it? Like, I got this one here, I got this one. And I'm like, man, I just split my money. That's what I told him. And for me, like trusting that he will be able to take it and has the expertise to do it, like in our generation. I'm happy to see that because too often I don't see that. Like, we were talking with some lawyers the other day. So many people like out here buying properties, and I can't name one black title attorney. And I need to be putting that in my firm. So every time they go buy something, they come right to our firm to get, pull somebody in to do title work. And then when they get out there and start advertising, they need to go to Todd to get them on the radio and get their commercials and all those different things. And we just have to be the intentional piece. We have to be that intentional about getting our folks put on. And the government piece, like we just put $25 million in a bill, a CARES Act funding that's going to go to minority businesses. And I've been there 9 years, so I know that that's the easy part, right? Like at this point, like when the RFP coming out, right? What day is the RFP coming out? So I can make sure that my folks are at the table and applying for it. Like, 9 years ago, I was like, hey, y'all, we just passed $25 million. Let's go to some minority-owned businesses. And 10 years later, nobody got nothing, right? So we just have to be like in it and studying it. And we had a bill. Anthony called me something about the other day. I was like, man, I didn't even know you were playing in this space. He was like, yeah, it's working for me. I'm like, great. I always supported it. Good to know that I know somebody that's benefiting from it.
Yeah. So there's another point, I guess I'll piggyback off of that is, being intentional, once again, in strengthening our Black economy as well. And so with that, the Black community, we have over $1 trillion in disposable income. And 97% of that is ultimately spent in non-African American businesses. So imagine if we only spend 3% in Black businesses as Black consumers. And imagine if we could ultimately begin to shift and change, take that 3% and ultimately increase that number to go towards Black businesses. Then what does that ultimately do? That allows for greater job creation. That allows for so many other things to ultimately manifest and take place. And so going back to, economics as well, I think that a lot of it is also about education and empowerment, understanding what, economics really is. And I'm going to let Anthony, talk more about, the importance of economics, but also, we have to understand our responsibility as well as a Black consumer. And the fact that in order to really strengthen the economy, then I have to be willing to as well invest into my brother or my sister. And so many times as well, we will price ship or price bargain when it comes to us, one another, and we will go next door to another race or to whatever for 5 cents difference. But yet, when it comes to brand and designer, Jordans, Louis, Gucci, and X, Y, and Z. We will spend whatever to ultimately purchase those types of things. And then as well as a Black consumer, I think that we as well, we don't give ourselves an opportunity as well to either correct certain mistakes and to ultimately get it right. I'm not saying in terms of Black business to Black business, you should ultimately settle for lesser quality, but you should be able to ultimately first communicate with that particular Black business owner, and understand the importance of both parties to really work together and see each other, thrive and succeed. But far too often, it's like, okay, well, I want to be the one that ultimately says, not only do I not have if I have a bad experience, not only do I have that experience, I didn't want to boycott, and I want to tell every other person that I ultimately know, don't go there, it's not that good, et cetera, et cetera. It was not that good, but yet we will sit there and go to certain chain restaurants that are bland or that are subpar over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. We don't give our same, counterparts the same opportunities. And that goes back to, how all that goes into the building of our economy. So there's $1 trillion in our disposable income, and we spend 97% in non-Black businesses. So Anthony, tell us about economics.
I mean, it's just kind of how we've gotten here. It's been something I've been kind of studying lately, and I'll definitely, try to rely on some more of my elders in the room to kind of, touch on some of these things, because I am trying to understand. You like that? I like that. But at the end of the day, because at the end of the day, we saw the civil rights movement that, through hitting them in the pocketbooks and these boycotts and stuff, they were willing to make changes. And it's almost like, going back to even Ted, I'm not going to judge how that generation chose to protest and go about their fight against inequalities. But it's almost like sometimes when I look at it, we kind of got tricked into like giving our customer base away. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because sometimes, me looking at some of the history things is, we talk about, like I said, I applaud Rosa Parks what she did and what she was willing to sacrifice. But like, we talk about being able to sit on the front of their bus, but we don't talk about all the Black bus and cab companies throughout the South that went out of business when integration hit. And I mean, looking at, the Lincoln Hotel and some of these developments that I'm working on, like a lot of the deterioration of these Black businesses started around that time. You know what I mean? So it's almost like we got tricked, and it's almost like I kind of sometimes think about it like that phenomenon of like when you pass that club or that restaurant. For us, that's go to these clubs from time. Not saying that's me, but when you see that line, it's like I want to see what's in there. I want to see, and it's almost like with our businesses and then our neighborhoods, with us moving to the suburbs, that phenomenon they use redlining some of these things and to keep us out, and then it's like, no, we got to get in. We got to see what this is all about. And then I always tell people, we moved to the suburbs sometime, and you had that first Super Bowl party, and your neighbors call the cops on you, so you can't even be comfortable. So that's one thing I've tried to understand. Like, how did our businesses get here? But I do think it comes back to what I talked about earlier, being we have to be willing to do more than come back and go to church in our Black communities. And it takes people, we have to realize the value, the kind of the trend you're seeing the last 10 to 15 years is a lot of urban, Black, inner city Black communities that, you're seeing gentrification. Then we're doing the same thing we did with the suburbs. We want to move back in after it's the hot place to be. Mm-hmm. When like now you got to pay top dollar. So I think we're looking at neighborhoods like South Baton Rouge, Scotlandville, two neighborhoods I'm focusing on. We have an opportunity right now to get into these neighborhoods at low cost basis, and put our businesses and our homes in them and ride the tide up, but also have equity at the beginning. I'm doing a house on Myrtle Street where, when we're complete, I'm gonna have 50 to 70,000 in equity when we're complete, and that's now my home is an asset. People talk about their home as an asset. No, like if you're paying $300,000 for a house that's worth $301,000, it's not really, you know what I mean? And things change, interest rate go up, you're really underwater. So even touch on saying, like, we got to stop looking at these things, these institutions, say, okay, what works for us? What like, okay, it's not that everybody should, always want to buy a home. Like it might be buying that first home as a duplex, rehabbing it where you're living, you living like you want, but having that renter side so you're not, you're not stressed on your mortgage or you're not paying the mortgage at all. You know what I mean? And like we gotta like just start having real strategies, or everybody, you see people in there. I say this all the time. This society tells us to do things in our 20s and 30s that literally make no sense. And we get to 35, 40 years old and we're at the same place that we're at 19. We start talking about college debt. You start talking about, people run off and get married without no real plan. Sometimes, so it's like, so we start really looking at some of these institutions, hey, what works for me? Let me stop listening to, let me buy this duplex, let me buy this fourplex and live in one unit and rent it out and like let my first home be a real asset. But it takes two, I understand, being able to get this information, and that's why I started the course for me to put my office in this neighborhood where I can be a community hub and I can do some of these things as far as educating and being able to touch people because we're in proximity to each other, and I think that proximity is going to help, in my opinion.
And to piggyback off that, but everything, it always takes money to make money. I think, just like you say, you can buy a duplex or get a duplex and live in one side or the other side. But if I can't find a bank that lend me the money, it's not gonna work. If you can't find investors to buy half the block up, it's not gonna work. We can have great ideas, but if we don't have the money, it's hard. And that's the biggest thing. We only have one like black-owned bank in Louisiana, but are they giving us money?
And that's when
are we holding their feet to the fire? You know what I mean? And that's the thing. We put money in other banks, but are we getting that out? Because I remember when I first bought my first home, I went to try to get pre-approved, and it was like you got to pre-approve for something over 150. I'm like, man, I don't want to put myself in that kind of debt. So my first home was a fixer-upper, and it was harder for me to get a loan for $45,000 than it was to get a loan for $150,000 because they don't mind putting you in that debt.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So that's what I went through. But we it's hard. So we got to figure out how we get the money, how we put the money back in the community, because some of these other nationalities, they will loan each other money and don't ask for interest. They want to see each other be successful, and they don't mind doing it. So where do we get, and how much does it take to get to that point where you can just give somebody $100,000 to start a business?
And while I do agree with you, some of it, when you look at the numbers in the Black community, the money's there. It's just where's the money going? Right. A lot of times, because I see a lot of these kids who I know come from not the great situation in my AU basketball program, but they got every pair of joints. So it's like if you can spend now, $300 a month on shoes, you know what I mean? And like, let's just take that and put it in the brokerage account. But it comes to like understanding these things. And so, but I will not to discredit and say we're not lacking opportunity, but we are. But two is like when you start, and I say in a lot of areas, like my thing is always the money's there. You look at the police budgets in a lot of these cities where, the police budget is $200 million. Then you go to education, housing, social services, and different. It's $15 million. You know what I mean? So it's like, let's redirect some of that and stop buying tanks. You know what I mean? So it's like, we just gotta, but it comes with real strategy. You know what I mean? To really execute on some of these things and understanding where our gaps at. But and like, I think one thing we have to understand as Black people is like, at this point, we need us all. We might have some different agendas and different things. And the honest part is we need people pushing different things because everybody can't accomplish things. We need the things Ted that are pushing are different from you as leaders. But it's like, I think we just have to realize that like, it's gonna take some cohesiveness. It's gonna take us coming together. And whether it's the church, whether it's living in the same community, or whether it's using these social media platforms, we need to use every tool we can to build this cohesiveness to start getting some of these things accomplished. Because at the end of the day, it's on me to continue building my construction company. So some of these people you're talking about that don't have opportunity, I need to be hiring them. You know what I mean? But if I can get government contracts and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And it's like, that's on me to do. Like, and that's my purpose, to bring resources into the community based on my relationship that typically wouldn't come into Baton Rouge. And like, then it's on me to empower those people to be able to empower you to do what you're doing, and like just continue to building that ecosystem and realizing like everybody has a role. Everybody has a role in this, and we need everybody.
You're talking economy. I think that ultimately the answer to that is we've got to do business with each other. I look at this table. Ted has been my client when he's run for state office. Thank you. Larry, when he first ran, was my client. I used to handle Mount Zion's advertising before Reverend Brown got here with when they did something. And your mother was one of my first clients when I started Alpha Media and Public Relations. So at the end of the day, I've done business with everybody here but Kimball. And I just, so ultimately, we've got to figure out, why we should turn our dollar in our own community, why it's important. And we also got to treat each other right in business so you can feel good about spending your dollar with me. I can feel good about spending my dollar with you. And a lot of times that becomes some of the issue, but we got to be bigger than that. Right. And I think now more than ever, we realize that, it may be Kimball's company who gives my kid a job, a summer job one day. And so I need to try to figure out a way to do some business with Kimball. It may be Ted who gives my kid a job as a page at the Capitol one year. So, I got to do right by Ted. So at the end of the day, I think we got to figure out how to intentionally spend more money with each other and think about it before you just go and give your money away. Right.
Correct. So one thing I'll say, and then I have a few questions for Ted and Larry, but one thing that you mentioned about having access to money, takes money to make money. So one thing that I ultimately think is that we need to pool our resources together more, as you mentioned. So when it comes to a Black credit union, that's one thing that we ultimately have the ability to do, and that we ultimately need to do, not only here, but in other areas as well. But it's the pooling together of resources to be able to then invest into communities and neighborhoods so that we can stimulate our economy as African Americans. But I want to shift and pivot and get back to from the legal standpoint. So Ted, Larry, as it relates to bills and laws that need to be created and or changed for change as it relates to criminal justice, policing, and other things of that nature, what type of laws need to be passed? What is that we need to be pushing for?
I'll let Larry go first.
Ted is the chairman.
So it's a lot. Like, I mean, we did a significant amount of work in 2017 after Alton Sterling. And I'll be the first to say that there's no way that we can legislate morality. We can't litigate action, but we can try to mitigate bad behavior with some of the bills. So the one of the first and most important things that folks need to recognize, in most police departments, the state police doesn't have a union, the sheriffs don't have a union. Police, the union is the biggest impediment, right? Mm-hmm. And then the other person that's the biggest impediment is the district attorney, because it matters not what we have in law if the district attorney is not going to prosecute. Let's say that. It matters not what the officer does if chief is going to fire them and the police union will allow them to come back in. So the first and most important thing, in my opinion, and we have so many ideas out there. We have 2 resolutions going through the legislature right now, one in the Senate and one in the House, to create a task force to study a lot of these issues. We got to look at the union contracts. We got to make it harder for bad officers to stay on the force. We got to make it harder we passed a bill in 2017 that said if you were convicted of an issue in Baton Rouge, you lose your post certification. In Louisiana, you are certified. Every law enforcement officer has post certification. What we found out, you could get an issue in Baton Rouge, but move to Opelousas. Getting the issue in Opelousas, move to Shreveport. So we passed a bill that said once you're convicted, then you lose your post certification. The problem is they don't ever get convicted because they get put on leave without pay. We tried to do that in 2017. It died in the legislature. We tried to end the leave without pay. And then I heard from a lot of African American officers that's like, hey, Ted, pump your brakes, because a lot of times we get false complaints. The same racism, they get them as police officers. So, a lot of times you're hurting some of the good officers too by saying that while I'm on leave, I can't protect my family. So one of the other things that we're gonna look at is retirement. Like Blaine Salamone killed out to Sterling, we still gonna pay his retirement, right? So when you are arrested, convicted or something, resign in lieu of termination, we need to be able to give me that retirement back. And one of the other things is when the lawsuit is finally settled, we again, the Black community that was been victimized, our tax dollars are gonna pay that lawsuit to the family. So we're looking at how to either take those dollars for lawsuits out of retirement benefits, even looking at whether police officers should look at holding some type of insurance. I'm a lawyer, I gotta have malpractice insurance. Your doctor has to have malpractice insurance. Whether or not we do that, use of force policies, rubber bullets, tear gas, knock warrants, like non-knock warrants, like how do we address all of those things? So I think that you'll see a slew of bills in 2021, and some of us are really trying to either get it included. We're hearing that we may go back into session in the fall. So we've been talking to leadership about including this. Everybody, you stood with us on the floor after the protest on a couple Sundays ago. So stand with us when it's time for us to do those bills and not wait for 2021, because we know some of those allies, they're gonna fall off by 2021. So we're gonna try to do a lot of these things now, and even on tomorrow when we do the budget, there's going to be an amendment to say that we're not going to defund police officers, but we're going to say that officers or police departments that get state appropriations, before we release those funds, you need to adopt this use of force policy, right? So that's going to happen on tomorrow, right? That amendment is coming tomorrow on the House floor. So a lot of these things, and I want the community to know that we hear you. And Larry talked about how hard it is. 105 of us in the House. There's 67 Republicans, 2 independents. It's like 34 Democrats, and only 25 of us are Black, right? So that's less than a third of the legislature or the House of Representatives look like the folks that are sitting up here. We have Democratic allies, right? But 35 out of 105. So that's the mountain that we're standing at the bottom of looking up. But we're going to have an opportunity to make sure that those people that stood side by side with us the other day to talk about how peaceful the protest was in Baton Rouge and how well behaved everybody was, because they were so shocked that our people could protest and be well behaved. We're going to make sure that they stand on the side of us to pass some of these bills in a couple of days, and if not, tomorrow in October or whenever we come back, our next session.
Just to ask a question about Baton Rouge Police, because I just recently found out that Baton Rouge Police Force was self-insured. Is that common for cities for the police department to be self-insured? Mm-hmm. Okay.
And one other thing, I guess, that may be a long shot, but when it comes to law, that I do want to bring up is, I'm trying to find my notes, is reparations. And so reparations basically they're defined as making amends for a wrongdoing, I guess, that one has done to another party or another race by paying money to. And so in 1865 to 1870, we as African Americans, we were promised by the Federal Bureau to receive 40 acres of land, $50 in a mule. However, this was never paid. Between 1619 and 1865, based upon the number of slaves and number of hours they worked, this creates a debt of over $5 trillion plus inflation and interest that is due back to the Black community. And so we say, okay, well, has this happened before? So when we look at the Homestead Act of 1862, this gave whites 162 acres of land at no charge right before slavery ended. And then 2 million families took advantage of this. And this was in addition to the Land Redemption Act in 1841 that allowed white families to receive 160 acres of land at $1.25 per acre. So which totals out to be $200 for 160 acres of land. And also in 1973, Alaska Natives, they placed a claim against the US government and they received over $1 billion plus 40 acres of land. In 1945, the US gave the Jews 130 billion gold marks because of the Holocaust. In 1983, the city of San Francisco voted to give Japanese American victims $1,250 per year each year. And then between 1984 and 1987, between city council and Congress, it was voted to give $25,000 to each city employee of Los Angeles that was forced to resign and sent to intermittent camps. So reparations, I think, even though it may be a long shot, I believe that we as a people, we should begin to ultimately fight for and push for reparations. And it was actually something that I saw today. Bob Johnson, the CEO former CEO of BET, he talked about reparations.
17 trillion.
Yeah,
was the number he floated.
Mm-hmm.
I think reparations are due to Black folks.
Mm-hmm.
You think about it. We were brought here out of our will. We worked and built this economy. You think about sugar and cotton. People don't realize once upon a time, the river region in Louisiana was one of the wealthiest places in America, in the world, because of sugar and cotton. And who did all that work? Black folk. Mm-hmm. And so at the end of the day, we are owed reparations. It's a tough fight because,
Mm-hmm.
The systemic racism. You just talked about 5 groups that got reparations, right, including white folks. Mm-hmm. But when it comes time to pay us, yeah, it's troublesome. I believe in my lifetime, I might not see it, but y'all young, y'all may see it. I think you got to push for it.
Yeah.
A guy like Bob Johnson floated 17 trillion idea. The number that you said, what did you say, 4 or 5?
I said over 5+ trillion. So
5 trillion with interest is about 17 trillion. So at the end of the day, I think that's a great starting place. What's really sad though, if we got reparations, what's going to happen? Yeah. In less than 2 years, we're going to spend it right back in the marketplace. So it'd be really an economic stimulus. Yeah. So give us that reparations. Some of us will be smart enough to invest it and build like Anthony Kimball. And then some of us will go out and buy Jordans. Yeah. So I'm being funny and facetious, but also truthful.
And then you didn't mention the reparations that we just handed out in 2019 to all these corporations.
500 billion.
And the funny thing is, it's like, we were on a call during like the beginning of COVID, and some of my colleagues, they were amazed. They didn't know the unemployment benefit in the state, the weekly benefit. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, man, the beauty of that. Like, Pete, you've been here 8 years with me, and you never had that issue come up in your district that you didn't know there was $240 is the lowest in the country. And I was like, wow, the beauty of representing a group of people, and you didn't even know that. And they kicking us, we've been out of business for 8 long weeks, kicking and screaming behind 8 weeks. I'm like, man, this is how people live. 8 generations, 8 years, 8 months. Right. And y'all kicking and screaming about 8 weeks. Yeah. And the federal government just printed out money and gave all these folks.
Well, and 500 billion to companies that really don't probably pay much at all, if anything, in taxes. So they got free checks.
And right now, we were joking at a Ways and Means committee today. I asked them I say, how much money y'all gave away today? And it's hijacking the COVID pandemic to give out money to big corporations. It's not going to trickle down to the Black people in the back, coming in the back door, standing up those businesses. Mm-hmm. And we today in your legislature, under the shadows of this church, gave out millions of dollars in tax benefits under the umbrella of these folks been hurting because of the COVID pandemic.
I'm looking to kind of piggyback with y'all talking about the unemployment, and they still have somebody to try to pass a bill to make it harder to get unemployment. Yeah. Harder. They get $240. For real.
So let me ask this question, Reverend Brown. So when it comes to, I guess, unemployment, and when it comes to as well, I guess, certain government subsidy programs that a lot of us are on, how do you feel about that? Is that an enabler? How do you feel about that situation?
The easiest way I could probably explain it. When you look at 1 Timothy 5, Paul lays out the system, if you will, for what we're supposed to do to help people and take care of people. If we could manage to really do what the church could do or should do, we could take care of our own. See, when you know, all of the stuff you all are talking about, all of that, I've had to go through all of that already. So when I look at how I grew up and I look at the different individuals who had the 40 acres and the mule who lived next to me, and then the white people who got theirs, and I grew up with all of it. I saw all of it, okay? And one of the things I learned early on, God made land one time, he's not making it again. And when you don't understand the value of land, and I could show you 40 acre after 40 acre after 40 acre that black people had that they lost because they just wanted to get to the city. And when you don't have the land, you no longer have the assets that you were talking about. See, it doesn't matter about the building, it's the land that's important. And so whenever you don't have the land, then you can't take care of yourself. So when you look at what they did, well, let me come at it a different way. I didn't like history, but I remember when I was at Southern, and I didn't like civics either. But I remember I was at Southern, and Dr. Saunders said this, and I'll never forget. He said, the Emancipation Proclamation was a war measure. He said, Lincoln didn't want to do that. He had to do that to save the Union. And when he said that, it stayed with me because it then started showing me they did what they did, not because they loved black folk. They did what they did because they loved America. And so then when they gave you the land and or you sharecrop, however you want to look at it, and they told you, go do this, but it was against the law for you to know how to read, so then you can't read the books. And I have books with my ancestors where they owed them at the general store. And so you got them over the barrel. They can't take care of themselves. So the easiest thing for them, they wind up giving you back your mule and your land because they couldn't afford to take care of the crop that they needed to take care of themselves, which is the same thing that you said earlier. What happens if I can't go to the bank to borrow the money, then I can't put the crop in the ground, which is the whole black farmer issue. Okay, I ain't going to go down that road. But when you ask the question, the church was the school. And so then we were educated in the school and the church to take care of our own. And that's what the black church did. Okay. And then whenever you start depending on other people to take care of you, which other people don't do that, we kind of do that. So when you depend on other people to take care of you, look at the systems they put in place to keep you where you are. So they say, okay, all right, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do the sharecropping thing. Then that's not gonna work for you. So then we're gonna give you welfare. And then we're gonna say to you, okay, if you get this man and put him in the house, we're not gonna give you your money. So that system keeps going. Mm-hmm. So then you start looking at each and every system that they continue to bring out. That system was never designed for you to be able to take care of yourself. That system was designed for you to keep coming to them. So when you go, when somebody offers you stimulus checks or whatever it is, that's simply to shut you up and keep you coming back with your hand out. And one of the hardest things for me over the 54 years I've been living is to learn how to handle the frustration that you encounter when you see people trying to keep you down and keep their knee on your neck and you don't even know that's what they're doing to you. But that's why we do what we do. And when I sit back and I just look back over my life and I think about all of this stuff, it's so easy. I'm on a job making $100,000 a year, but I'm making them $7 million. And I'm proud. I got a brand new car every 2 years. A brand new car every 2 years. I'm making six figures, but I'm making you $7 million. So that means I got to be worth more than $100,000. But I failed to see something that my dad tried to teach me. We didn't get an allowance. He didn't believe in that. He believed you work, and when you need something, I buy it. So I got up, I'm 15, I got a job working in the whole field with the white man next door. The man paying me. I don't even understand. Your daddy has you out there working, and when it gets hot, you come home. But now you're working for the man, it's hot, you stay out there the whole day. And you working for this man, you get paid for this man, and your daddy owns everything. You hear what I'm saying? And then you leave what you own to go work for somebody else, and you get used to working for somebody else. And a light bulb came on. And I said, I ain't working for nobody else. So I went to school, got these degrees, wound up going to DuPont, and I'm doing the same thing again. I'm working for somebody else. And the Lord says, hey, you need to leave that alone, because you get caught up in the money and you leave your neighborhood. I couldn't wait to get out of Louisiana. You know why? I went through too much. But I failed to see. God was showing me, I'm going to take you out of this to show you what to do when you go back. You don't want your people to have their hand out. Because if they keep their hand out, they'll never be able to feed themselves. They keep coming back to you. And those folk love it when you keep coming back to them. And all you got to do, I don't care what anybody says. Nobody has to agree with anything I say. I tell you this here. The stuff in this book, it'll answer every question. Every question. And it's laid out, because when you start looking at it, you say, wait a minute. We didn't start out to work, but sin came in. But then you look and you say, well, wait a minute. How did this all play out? The Egyptians said, okay, we're going to make slaves out of these people. How did they get there? Because the Israelites were hungry and they needed food, and they went to Egypt to get it. And the next thing you know, you get it from Egypt, and now you're stuck there in Egypt and you can't leave. Then they make you make bricks without straw. And then finally, God delivers you. But then you turn around and go right back and do it again. Let me say this short way. Look at what we do. We get delivered, turn around, go right back in. One that let us loose. We say, please take us back, because we don't want to be out here by ourselves. Take us back, and we go back. And that's what we do. And I came back saying, hey, man, we got to stop this. Everything we need is in the church if we put it there. We'll put it at Healing Place or Bethany before we put it at Mountain. That's what we'll do. You know why we'll do it? Because I feel more comfortable, because I trust him. I don't trust this brother, because see, this brother done moved out the hood and he over here doing his thing. The hardest thing for us to do is to trust each other. And you know why? Because they did that from the beginning. That's the way they set it up. I have a good friend. He lives in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We talk about every week or so. He wrote a book entitled The Cross Burns Brightly. And in that book, he talked about what he saw in the NFL and what he saw when he grew up in Georgia. And it wasn't until he really connected with Christ. And he took where the Klan burnt the crosses in his yard to the cross of Christ. And he linked the two together to talk about how it impacted him. And every time he goes to buy horses, he calls me first and asks me, what do I have? Because he says, Renee, I have to give back. I have to spend my money in my community. And he does that. For the last 4 years, he has done that. And this is what he did for me. And I'm going to shut up and I say this, because I'm really getting back to this. And he took me around. He said, Renee, I want to introduce you to these different individuals. Because see, they don't mind one of us being successful. They just don't want a bunch of us to be successful. And he started introducing me to the players. And he said, this is my friend, and I want y'all to help him. Because he was getting older and he was getting out of the cutting horse business. And because of what he did, they all helped me. And they're all white people. And his name is Mel Blount. And Mel says religiously, Renee, I'm going to take care of you every step of the way. But he had to come to a point where he realized what his purpose was and his destiny was. Right? And it's not in people giving you a handout, it's in people giving you a handout.
Just to touch on part of that too, I think one thing, even we're talking about who we are, our existence, going back to reparations thing, one thing with how this society is built, it doesn't really work to empower the help. I mean, we're socialists at the corporate level, and we need cheap labor. But I think one thing that's important for our people and their identity, we have to, for me, stop identifying everything from this period of slavery. That is literally one of the most white supremacist thoughts that we perpetuate through our community. Literally, you've seen the more civilized Europe, you've seen Black people in Africa, building wonders of the world. You see stories of people traveling the world for gold and spices. So you tell me for a 400-year period, only white people were able to sell? So that tells me, and you read some of these whitewashed stories about, emperors and kings leaving Africa, they get lost at sea, and it's like, no, they hit South America. They hit North America and they set up shop. And I say that to say, with myself, Tulane did a study on my Creole family going in Pointe-Coupee Parish, going back to the 1500s. Free men of color going back to that period. So I say that we're entitled to this land and identity. While I do believe some, did come through the transatlantic slave. No, there were Black people from Africa selling and doing some of these things. You look at the meaning of the word Tuscaloosa, it means tall, dark-skinned man. That was the name, that was the name of these tribes. So let's say, that these people, were here, some of our ancestors were already here, and we're entitled to this land, because I think we let this even tell a lot of our kids, hey, we're white people, we brought you here, and we did it, and if you don't like it, you can go back. And it's like, no, we were coming here just like y'all come here. And let's not forget, there was melanated people in the more civilizing Europe in the 1400s, and a lot of the first whites that were sitting here were criminals. You know what I mean? It's like we forget these bits and pieces of the story. And then it's like, okay, they were sending criminals, and you act like some of the trickery and thievery wasn't going. These people were criminals. Right. That was the foundation of this country. It's like we tell some of the parts of the stories, and then we forget the other parts of the stories. But I think with a lot of this knowledge that we have learned in these public school systems that was set up by private entrepreneurs, and the Carnegie Mellon and some of these other people, Rockefellers, that took part in funding public education. These were the people that did this for their financial benefit, but we're still telling these stories like it benefit us. Like, no, all our people didn't come from slavery. That is proven. We gotta start taking the knowledge that's out there and some of the things and then being say, hey, well, this institution, they've been lying to us. How can we do this different? Okay, they won't put it in the public school. Okay, we need to, somehow institute this in our homes or in the church or figure out where can we get this knowledge of who our people and our real history to, the young people, so they can understand who they really are and what they did, where they come from. And two, I think that's another part of it, that when we talk about reparations, we don't talk about that part. If America ever reveals this lie of some of the people who was here, when you start talking about treaties and stuff like that, you got a problem. So I'm gonna keep on saying y'all from Africa. Because at the end of the day, if you can prove that you were aboriginal to this country and you were here, you start opening up a different, different book, a different problem that America has. So I think too is we still need to start looking at things and be like, hey, that is BS. And I'm not telling my kids that. So, and for me, it's I'm still exploring these truths, but it's I know that wasn't the story. So that part of the story, you're never going to hear. And we're going to figure something out that makes more sense. And then we need to figure out the safe spaces, whether it's the church, whether it's community hubs, whether it's, where to be able to, get this knowledge into our community's hands and have real conversations like we're having right here tonight.
And I think that another point, I guess, that you mentioned about, understanding the history, understanding, who you are. We talked about the word being intentional. And I think that when it comes to us as adults, I think that we have to take accountability and responsibility as well for being intentional in educating ourselves. Just as we seek, as Ted mentioned, we seek everything else on Google, and we pull up this on Instagram, and we do all this all day long, and we want to see what this person is doing. We need to be intentional about becoming more educated on so many things, that are right there for us to ultimately seek out and to learn. So I think that, as well, there's a sense of accountability that ultimately starts with us and being intentional. So I've got two more questions, and then I guess we'll close the panel discussions. But one of the questions is the role of fatherhood. Fatherhood and families, what role does that play in the strengthening and the stabilization of the Black community? You want to start?
Yeah, I'll start. I think it means everything. I was I had my father is deceased, but he and my mother divorced when I was 13. But prior to 13, my dad was the world to me and my brothers. He took us everywhere he went. We were always rocking up on his shoulders. He was a pretty wild guy. He drove fast. He had an incredible vocabulary and was just really I thought, a genius when I look, and look back at it and look at his gifts. But this society beat him down, and the drinks and the drugs got to him. And watching my father go off the edge, it made me become resolved to be the best father I could be when I became a father. And so, I have a 23 and a 21-year-old boy and a girl, young man and young lady, I should say. And, all of my life, since they were born, it was about being the best father I could be to Todd and Elise, because I did not want what I witnessed and went through to happen. And so, I believe that I'm a mama's boy. I'm the oldest of three boys, but I believe that fathers are equally as important as a beautiful mother. And when you have a great mother and a great father, that child is so much more whole. And so, boys need fathers to tell their boys to look people in the eye, to tell their boys to speak the King's English, to tell their boys to be men, to straighten your back up, to respect people, and to treat people in a dignified way, and have some character and integrity about yourself. I think that fathers give Black boys that. Mothers love their babies. And so, quite frankly, I think a lot of times moms make their boys weak and sorrier because they do everything for them. I'm not disparaging moms, but I just, have witnessed that. But I think fathers are incredibly important to the development of boys, but also girls. I love my daughter. I loved when Kobe Bryant started that girl dad thing. I had the joy of coaching both of my kids in youth basketball, and one of the most rewarding experiences was coaching my daughter's team in fifth grade. It was a bunch of little suburban girls who decided to play basketball, and we went undefeated. And it was just incredible to see these young ladies, and how well they work together. And I got just as much joy out of coaching them than I did coaching my son and his teams. And we used to kill people. And I loved killing people. So at the end of the day, I think that it's important for us to be strong fathers, for us to be in our kids' lives, and for us to be honest with our children. You're not here to be a friend to your child. You're here to be a father and a guide, and to lead your child into adulthood. I'm not here to be my children's friend. I'm here to be their father, to make sure they have what they need, to be their provider, to be their moral compass, to show them to Christ. And I believe that fathers have such an important role to play. And I think fathers need to take their job more serious. one thing I hate to hear somebody tell you babysitting. I ain't babysitting. It's my kids. You know, I'm one of my children. Well, I got to be babysitting. So I think fatherhood is so important, and it's actually one of the most rewarding jobs that I've ever done.
Man, Todd, I could just say ditto. My little girl will be 3 in August, but that last statement, and I have people that I know and love and respect see me with my baby and say, "You babysitting?" No, I'm parenting.
Right.
And nobody would say that to a mother. And
Right.
I think fathers have to stress that and say it and be, very actively involved. For me, it's the most important role that I have. And Larry, a few weeks ago, like this Representative James stuff, a few weeks ago, I was ready to give it away after I got out of the hospital. It just, and I think, but for the topic that brought us here, but for this thing coming back up, I could have been very comfortable with walking and never going back in the Capitol as Representative James. That's where I was coming out of COVID. And all I was focused on when I was in the hospital, not being able to see my baby again. If the last time I saw my child was the last time she saw me, and the last time I saw that is what really was on my mind. Nothing else. I don't want Sunday to be the last day that I saw my child. And that is just, she is the only thing, at the end of the day, the only thing that matters.
Good stuff.
I don't have any kids, so I don't have those sentimental stories. But I think one thing that's important with looking at family, we're one of the only communities that family is not the heart of the business formation or a lot of other races, family is where the business is created out of. You look at some European families where they've owned business, houses, land for years that they just passed down, and that's, to me, is well, a lot of that family got to worry about the stress of ever having to pay a mortgage. You know what I mean? I look at it like that, and with building legacy and stuff like that, and building something great issue, a lot of that starts in family. And I think with the Black community, we got to get away from the thing of you can't do business with family. We're the only community that says that. You look at every other community, they're doing business with family. You know what I mean? The family is the foundation of the business. You know what I mean? And literally, my title attorney, the title attorney, because his dad was the president of the bank. He was it just made sense. And his dad was intentional. Hey, what you about? You know what I mean? It just made sense. So I think that's one thing for us that we in the Black community, we got to realize that the cohesiveness you have in your house, that is a lot. You see these people, but also understanding, going back to what Dr. Brown said, is that also understand that's why they needed to destroy a lot of our family units, because when you take away that cohesiveness, you put the daddy here, the mama here, the kids hating the dad and stuff,
confusion.
You kill the chance of building legacy and building business, because we are on these personal, emotional things. You know what I mean? That of really what these systematic things doing. Your dad ain't in the house, not because mama don't want him. Really, it's more financially feasible for daddy not to be here, and that's what I got to do to pay the rent. I might curse you out and find a way to put you out, because it's so do I deal with you, no money, or do I get this money? So that's just a choice that our community shouldn't have had to make. But I think one thing too, we have to do more, and I really challenge myself in our family is creating abundance, just not for that immediate family, and trying to touch people within your family, and trying to look for gifts within kids and that next generation that just are one thing for me I see a lot is with Black men, the one time we will do stuff for other kids, and when it comes to sports, this kid's a good athlete, I'll take some time with him. I think he's gonna be that's one time. But you see a kid that might be interested in STEM or something like that, do you give him that same attention? You know what I mean? But it's we have to be willing to spend time with those kids too, right. And not just the kids that look like this might be your lottery ticket, and be willing to mentor and talk life to these kids, and talk about being a lender, being a lawyer, being a doctor, being some of these other things. Those are some of my things that I see within the Black community.
Kind of piggyback what he said, but I love being, Luke and Larry Jr.'s dad. That's a great accomplishment. I want my kids to experience things that I've never experienced in my life. But, you know, for me, not having somebody to have a father figure sometimes is more important than having a daddy. You know, because everybody can have a daddy, but if he's not teaching you nothing,
Right.
it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? So sometimes that's, you know, that's what we have to do. We have to be a father figure to other folks. But, you know, I just want my kids to have the best, you know, and have the opportunity and have the same playing field, you know, that everyone else has and same opportunity. So that's, I love being a dad.
Deuteronomy 6, Ephesians 6, basically say the father's responsibility is to instruct and teach the children in the way of God. If a father teaches his children about God and provides the example of God in their life, you can rest assured, no matter what happens to them, whether their life goes up or down, they'll find a way to hold on. Because when you look at the overall broad brush across the Bible, if you look at what took place when Pharaoh was concerned about the growing of the Israelites, he said, kill all the babies that are males. When Herod was concerned about a new regime coming in, he said, kill all the male children. We didn't make a choice to not be home. We were basically told, you have no choice. We'll just take you out of your home.
Right.
And so as a result, things happened to us that were not necessarily our fault, but at the same time, if we could get back to the core of what the Word has taught us, and we start teaching and instructing our children in God, what you're going to wind up seeing is the reverse of what we just saw with Florida. Because again, we are expendable. Let's just kill off all the males. If you just keep killing off the males, you can have access to the women whenever you want to, because that's the way that works. But if you can teach your sons and your daughters the value of that father being there, you now put a stopgate there. You know, when you look in your family and you see light complexioned people in your family, it tells you something has happened against somebody's will, at least where I came from. Okay. So when I look and I see that, that's the stuff that drove me to studying the Word and learning, wait a minute, God had nothing to do with this. It was all a part of, he just allowed it, but it was what the people did. It was what they took this book and made this book say what they wanted it to say. And what we've got to do is take this same book and make it say what it really says. And so when you really look at it and you see that in Genesis 1:27, we're made in his image. And then when you get over to chapter 5, and he brings Abraham on the scene, and then you get to chapter 6, and then he brings Isaac on the scene, and you get to chapter 7, and he brings Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, brings all of them together. And then the next thing you know, Joseph shows up. And then the next thing you know, Jesus shows up. But nobody teaches us that. Nobody helps us understand that. And then they tell us this lie that Ham was cursed. And so black folk are cursed. So then black folk think this is the way we are, and that's not the way we are. And as you said earlier, we knew about Christ before we came here. That's Acts chapter 8. But if nobody tells you that, you'll keep thinking that you were created to be a slave. You were created to take orders from somebody else. And until you get to that point where you recognize the real strength of a man, and the real strength of a man, let me preface what I'm going to say. I have learned the real strength of a man is his ability to take that word of God and show it to his children and say, now this is how you want to live your life, regardless of what other people have said to you, regardless of what they told you about yourself. God never intended for you to be the tail. He intended for you to be the head. But they knew that if you were the head, they would have to be the tail. And if you're gonna come to steal somebody else's land and claim it for yourself, if you're gonna steal it from somebody else, claim it for yourself, and then bring another group over and say they lazy to do your work, then you have to look at that and say, okay, wait a minute, what are you really trying to do? You're trying to protect your headship, because eventually your head's gonna roll.
Right, right.
And you ain't gonna, what you see going on right now, that's because the head's rolling. And when they get that head out that White House, it's gonna really start rolling. And then they're gonna be like, what do we do now? Because it's gonna shift on them, and they're not gonna be able to control it, because it's gonna be a shift that God is gonna make. It's not a shift that we're gonna make, it's a shift that's gonna make. And they're gonna have to line up, and that's the concern. That's what they're concerned. That's added to the question.
And I guess what I'll share is basically my thoughts are, when you look at the philosophy of Willie Lynch, talk about lynching, and part of the philosophy of lynching, Willie Lynch, his theory, is basically was to separate the man from the woman. So you would have the male and the female who would come together, they would mate, and then from there you separate the man from the woman. And going back to what Pastor Brown mentioned is, I think it all starts back from the Bible and the Word of God, and understanding what family really means, and how family also is a sign of unity. And so each party has a role to play, with the man being the head of the family. And so basically, you separate the man from the family, you're basically removing the head from the body. And so thereby, the family is always going to be weaker without having the head and without being at full strength and full capacity. So, and also not only from that aspect, but also even from a economical, from a financial standpoint. We look at, okay, if the man isn't present, and we're not talking about families that may, I guess, depend upon certain subsidies, but you're talking about two working parents, two incomes that are ultimately coming in, and you have this single parent home, which we have, in my opinion, things that we can begin to ultimately take responsibility for, or do better at, is to have more families, because as well, we talk about having resources and to be able to do certain things. And so why a lot of us ultimately as well, far too often, we have too many kids having kids, and then as well, when it comes to resources, economics, to then be able to invest, or to be able to show my child a different type of life, or expose them to different things, or put them in certain positions, is not ultimately there. Because you have one single parent, and then most of the time that single parent is barely making minimum wage, or making ends meet per se. So the father plays a huge role in the family, because it's a sign of unity. And so us as a Black family as well, in general, I think what we have to do as well is we have to begin to see each other as family, understand unity, strength, and what that ultimately means. And lastly is basically, I think that we have to also, I don't want to say call people out, but I think that we have to find a way to make sure that for the men that don't understand their purpose, and that are not presently in their children's lives, making a difference, making an impact, teaching them in the way that they should go, I guess my question is, how do we begin to ultimately kind of reinforce the importance of fatherhood with so many men, or so many men that don't even understand the importance of fatherhood?
I think it comes to real conversations, like you said, being honest with people, and also I think another part of it is that we are dealing with folks in our community that have real issues, mental health issues and stuff, and we have to be willing to give people help and understand that, like, there has to be a plan, because like, while I do think it's important for fathers to be in their kids' life. There's some fathers that it may not be beneficial for them to be in their kid life because of the season they're going through. And me as a part of your tribe, I need to be willing to step in and help you out during this season while you're going through this thing. Because the honest point in life, we all go through our ups and downs, our strong points, our low points. You know what I mean? So I think it's goes back to like community, understanding what you're going through, understanding real questions, like having real conversations, but also really be willing to like help each other. You know what I mean? Like it shouldn't be, hey, when you're 18, you out of my house. No, it's like I think like the family unit is more like just the mom, dad, the kids, stuff like going back to what I earlier said, we have to be all in this together. So with that being said, it's like I have to, we have to be willing to empower each other, help each other, be there when you're down, pick each other up. And I think, that's the same with empowering that next generation, that like, okay, we want the father to be that, that'd be ideal. But if, hey, that's not happening right there, that's not possible, okay, how can we still empower this kid that he reaches his full potential? And because that's really, that's what's important, you know what I mean? That we continue this cycle of empowering, that they know, like, and also they see that, someone was willing to empower me, someone was willing to help my dad or help my mom when that was needed.
I think you have to also be smart enough, if you're going to be a father and you're looking for some inspiration, look at somebody who is a good father. I've had the opportunity to see a number of men be excellent fathers. Your father, my friend, he was an excellent father to you and your sister. I always admired it. I always told him that, and it was one of those things of, this is how you can do fatherhood if you are intentional about it. But you got to be intentional about it because, there's no fatherhood playbook. You just kind of got to go through it. But you definitely got to look at, who's doing the job that you admire. And I think you can definitely gain a lot of gems and jewels from those people.
Okay, thank you. And for the final question, I guess to all, we'll close it out by whatever, I guess, gem, jewel you want to close out as it relates to what you want, the people to ultimately know that can strengthen our community. What's each person's closing words, final thoughts? Ted?
I'll just say that nothing that's for our community is going to happen without us being unified. And from the economic piece, the police reform piece, the how do we improve and the family is not going to happen if we're not collectively walking lockstep, getting out of our comfort zones, and just recognizing that no matter the zip code, the neighborhood, the fraternity, we all in it together. And until we could get to that basic understanding, we're not going to accomplish any of this stuff in large scale. We could get a few wins, but until we recognize our collective responsibility to walk lockstep, we're not going to make any wholesale changes.
For me, it's to be engaged, in your community from a political standpoint. Education is so huge. Education is what gave me my opportunities. And I really, really stress education to kids, to families as much. And education isn't always books and schools like you were talking about. I'm affiliated with the River Road African American Museum down in Donaldsonville, and it's amazing to see how so many of our people who actually became success stories didn't become success stories from school or books. They became success stories out of necessity. Yeah. Their family needed to eat. They had gifts, and they made a business, or they made a way. They made art. They made music. So for me, it's education and being engaged in your community.
For me, it starts local, local change. So, my thing would be, I extend myself to anyone, in this room, that's watching tonight, any way I can add value to anything, something, or, my resources can be valued, like I'm here, you know what I mean? So that would be my thing of, my extension of like, just continuing to figure out ways to work together.
And I think empowering people. I think that's the biggest key. You want to empower people. You want to learn, teach people how to make money. You want to teach people how to live. You want to teach, and sometimes it's teaching. You got to show them, and that's my biggest thing. And asking questions. And everybody on this panel know I don't mind calling them and asking them questions because I don't know it all, And if most of the people on this panel know where I came from, and they know I don't mind asking questions because, I have goals that I want to reach, and everyone has goals that they want to reach. And you just got to keep empowering people. One of my biggest goals in life, honestly, is to make, I have a certain number of Black millionaires I want to make, and that's my goal. I want to make Black millionaires. That's my goal, and so they can help build the community. They can continue to help build people around them. And if it's through politics, that's perfect. If it's through housing, that's perfect. If it's through helping somebody start a trucking company, that's perfect. That's my goal in life. I think that's my purpose.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. Psalm 127 says, except the Lord build the house, they that labor in vain. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. The one thing I would say to everybody, whatever you building, whatever you into, you better make sure the Lord's in it.
And my closing statements will be, number one, commitment. Everything starts with a commitment. Change is not going to happen without a commitment and without being intentional. Number two, unity. As Ted mentioned, we have to be unified. There's strength in numbers and we cannot be fragmented. Three, openness. You have to be open-minded as well. We talked about, just because it's not your idea doesn't mean that, you shouldn't support and be able to get behind it. So you got to be open-minded as well, as you mentioned, to get outside of your comfort zone. Be willing to do something new, do something different, learn something new. So openness. Next thing is vision. I think that as a people, we have to continue to have and create vision, strategy, solutions, not just talk about the problem, all day long and identifying it. That's step one, is to identify and to diagnose the problem. But then from there, you have to then work on creating the solution. What's the plan of action? How are we going to enact this to overcome, to combat, X, Y, and Z? And then as Larry mentioned, empowerment. We have the responsibility to continue to ultimately empower, whether that's through the church, whether that's through housing, whether that's through politics, whatever it may ultimately be, we have to continue to empower. So I thank you all for joining me this evening in this discussion of creating and enacting, discussing plans of action to enact change. And I thank you for joining us tonight, and be blessed.
2 fingers.